The High Court in Johannesburg this week handed down judgment in the murder of anti-apartheid activist Caiphus Nyoka. Abraham Engelbrecht and Pieter Stander were found guilty of killing Nyoka, while former police officer Leon Louis van den Berg was found not guilty. Nyoka was shot and killed inside his home in Daveyton in 1987 by members of a police unit allegedly created to eliminate individuals labelled terrorists by the apartheid regime. Nyoka was a prominent leader of COSAS in Daveyton and a regional coordinator for Transco East Rand. Both accused officers have been remanded in custody until the 11th of December, when the court will determine their bail applications. Apartheid-era police officer Johan Marais admitted to the role he played in Nyoka's death and entered a guilty plea. He was sentenced earlier this year to 15 years. I'm Marcelle Gordon, and you're listening to us on eNCA.com. Let's talk some more about this case and its significance with Lukhanyo Calata. He's the eNCA Director of News, and for the purposes of this conversation, we also acknowledge that he is, of course, the son of Fort Calata and Nomonde, his mother. Fort, of course, one of the Cradock Four who was murdered by the apartheid state in 1985. Lukhanyo, thank you for your time.
Marcelle. It's good to be here.
And for, I'm sure, the emotions that a story like this brings up in somebody like you and so many South Africans. I want us to start our conversation by listening to the judgment that was handed down by Judge Mohammed Ismail in the Joburg High Court earlier this week. Let's just listen.
It was submitted that accused number 1 did not testify at the inquest. In short, there is no evidence which ties him to the shooting of the deceased or that he was aware that the deceased was going to be shot. For that reason, the requirements as set down in the DESI do not apply to him. By the same token, there is no evidence that he associated himself with the conduct of the others, as he was not aware of the intent by the others to kill the deceased. 90. In the circumstances and on the totality of the evidence presented, I make the following order. 90.1. The prosecution failed to establish or prove beyond reasonable doubt that accused number 1 associated himself with the actions of Mr. Marais, accused 2 and accused number 3 to kill the deceased. To this end, it also failed to prove that accused number 1 acted in a common purpose with the others to kill the deceased. Accordingly, accused number 1, Mr. van der Berg, is found not guilty on the charge of murder. 90.2. The evidence presented, in my view, clearly established that there was a common purpose between Marais, Engelbrecht and Mr. Stander to kill Mr. Nyoka on the 24th of August 1987. 90.3. On the accepted evidence, the court finds that the assailants entered Mr. Nyoka's room not to effect an arrest, but to assassinate him. When the deceased was shot, he posed no threat to any of the policemen who entered the room. 90.4. Accused number 2 is found guilty of the crime of murder. The court finds that even though he did not shoot Mr. Nyoka, he gave the instruction that Mr. Nyoka should be killed. 90.5. Accused number 3, Mr. Stander, is convicted of murder. The court finds that he was one of the shooters who fired shots at the deceased, which caused the deceased's death. That is the court's findings.
That judgment by Judge Mohammed Ismail in the Joburg High Court. Lukhanyo, you listened to that judgment as well. It was covered extensively on eNCA channel 403. What went through your mind when you listened to that judgment?
A sense of peace. A sense of contentment. And a sense of gratitude. Particularly now that I know that, at least for the Nyoka family, they've had this moment and what it means, and the fact that they can finally have closure on it. And I reached out shortly thereafter to the family, quite close with Ma Alegria and their niece, Nation. And they were emotional and they were very happy that finally, at least a court in a democratic South Africa was able to express itself and was able to find these guys guilty. And I can't put to words in terms of what that means for that family and for other families like ours.
We also got reaction on eNCA from Allegra Nyoka in the courthouse as soon as the judgment took place. Let's listen to her now.
The question that we always carried as a family was, they were saying they killed Caiphus in self-defense, and we could see that could not be true because he was in the room with 3 other boys. So if they managed to take the 3 boys whom they didn't know if they were also terrorists according to their claim, and then they failed to take 1 man, it didn't make sense, you see. So as family, you always know we grew up together with Caiphus. We knew what he is capable of and what he is not capable of. So we knew their version was wrong. And finally, it has been proved that he was not carrying any weapon. He was defenseless and he was murdered in his sleep, which was very painful to us because he was murdered inside his room. And we were also present. So that was a very heavy burden to carry for all these years. And it's a pity that my parents didn't live to see this day.
The part of Mama Allegra's reaction to that really got me was when she spoke about how sad she is that her parents were not able to see this kind of justice. And that for me is almost poetic and tragic all at the same time. Seeing these inquests, seeing these court cases, finally seeing people stand in a courthouse. But with the thought of all of those generations who asked the same questions for decades, and they weren't able to see those answers before they took their final resting place. Those are big emotions to have to kind of try and process, right?
And there's a lot going on in that moment because you want to celebrate this moment. You want to say, finally, we've got it. You know what I mean? But in that same breath, at that exact same time, you're also filled with a lot of anger. You're filled with a lot of rage. Because as Ma Allegra says, that their parents went here to experience that moment. So I found that it's really like a massive conflict of emotions because you want to celebrate the moment, but you also know that the people that that moment would have really meant the world to are no longer there. And I think that's really the issue that we're facing with the ANC over the last 30 years was that it had the opportunity to hold these people accountable a lot earlier. And had the ANC government done so, maybe Caiphus Nyoka's parents would have still been alive to have experienced what happened in that court on Tuesday. And yeah, let me just leave it at that. Yeah.
This will be one of a few conversations, so we'll be able to get into it. But let's focus on the Nyoka case specifically. You speak about how so many decades have passed. Abraham Engelbrecht, probably Abraham Engelbrecht, Peter Stander sitting there in the courthouse, grey-haired, white men of a certain generation. But the wheels of this story and this trial was lubricated by one Johan Maree, who was one of those apartheid police officers who confessed to the murder years ago. It was a failed, I believe, a failed suicide attempt around 2017, I think it was, that led him to eventually confess. In fact, he admitted in a sit-down interview with the Business Day that it was the reopening of the inquest in 2017 into the death of Ahmed Timol, the communist activist, that really was the trigger for him to want to get all of this out because he had witnessed so much as a member of the apartheid police, including his role in the death of Caiphus Nyoka. And after that failed suicide attempt, he was in hospital or getting treatment somewhere, and he admitted to that murder, to a report journalist as well. So there are all these stakeholders in these stories. There are the families that were left behind. There's them seeking justice. There is the role of the media and how these stories were told and are still being told. And then these apartheid police officers. And this is one of thousands of similar stories. Is there any kind of hope that we could have seen more of these kind of police officers coming forward?
We should have. We should have, Marcelle. Remember when the TRC handed over its report to then former President Thabo Mbeki in 2003, there was around 300 cases that were all ripe for prosecution. Some needed just a little bit more investigation, but others were ready for prosecutions. And had President Thabo Mbeki and his National Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, Bulelani Nyoka, had they taken these matters seriously, we would have seen the prosecutions of Engelbrecht and the other one, including Marcelle. We would have seen those, or we should have seen those taking place anywhere from 2005 onwards, right? What that would have done was that the Nyoka case could have been resolved 20 years ago, right? These guys would have been prosecuted, would have been convicted for their crimes, and would have been sent to jail, right? That would have then allowed us as a country to have built an entirely new society, right? Because it would have been a society built on the fact that in this new South Africa, you will be held accountable.
And there's the tenet that there cannot be real freedom without justice.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Now, the message that would have sent would have been, again, that Black lives actually do matter. That whatever it was that you were taught under apartheid about who and what we are as Black people, that means absolutely nothing, because the truth of it is that Black lives actually do matter. But the ANC government's failure then to hold these people and others accountable, right? What it did was that it reinforced that notion that Black lives don't matter, right? And that these guys here could go on with their lives and their families and raise their families and see their grandchildren being born and you know what I mean, and take their daughters to their matric farewells and take their sons to hunting trips and do all of those things and live their lives as if they'd never walked into a room in Davidton and shot and killed a young man as if he was actually nothing, right? So the ANC government's failures, yes, we should celebrate the fact that today they are held accountable, but now they're old men.
Yeah.
Right? Are we going to send these old men to prison? Had they been sent to prison 20 years ago, today we would have possibly only been talking about them getting parole, having served their time for their crimes and all of that. And we would live in a South Africa that is completely different to what it is now.
I want us to listen now to a comment from the board member of the Human Rights Foundation, also a former TRC Commission member, Yasmin Suka, who has really been such a support to so many of these families all these years on. And she was in the courthouse on Tuesday. And I want us to listen to her reaction to the judgment.
This was a cold-blooded execution of a young man. This was state-sponsored violence. And these men needed to cough up where the instructions came from for them to carry out this dastardly deed. And while justice has been served by the conviction, at the end of the day, we have to ask the question, how much more truth have we learnt from this experience? And like the judge said yesterday in the Highgate matter, they weren't able to identify who exactly. They could talk about the fact that the state was responsible. And I think that for us remains why the Kampepe Commission of Inquiry is going to be such an important commission. And that is for the truth about what happened in our past to come out. Because when you listen to the victims' families, they lost loved ones. But then their rights to justice were violated by the democratic state. And I think we need to understand why that actually happened and what prevented prosecutions from taking place earlier.
She speaks there about the admittance and the finding that it was state-sponsored violence, that these men, however, did not cough up where their instructions came from. And this is the sticking point that we've had since the TRC days and all these decades on. How do we get around that?
I don't know how to get around it because it's very clear that the foot soldiers, right, they never, I suppose for a sense of protection, they never wanted to reveal where their orders came from. Now, I don't want to bring the Cradock Four case into today's discussion because I think we'll have an opportunity for us to be able to do that. But in the Cradock Four case, the orders came directly from the President of the Republic at the time, P.W. Botha. It then was cascaded down up until it reached the ground level, and then the foot soldiers were then the ones that committed.
And there were various committees in the various shadows of the apartheid government that processed those kinds of directives.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes. And the key committee in all of that was the State Security Council. And because it was almost like I won't say it was the shadow cabinet. I'm going to say it was basically the real cabinet, because the actual cabinet was really just a rubber stamping a committee, really, but the real decisions around safety and security in the country were taken at the State Security Council. And what that did, what the State Security Council did was to empower, ultimately, the guys that were on the ground, for them to be able to know that they can go in, kill somebody in their own room, but they would be protected from the consequences of that crime, right? And I think that's why we've seen a lot of it. And I think the one thing that we have to celebrate about all of these court cases now was that finally the judiciary is also getting to clean its hands of its complicity of apartheid crimes. Because if these two guys could walk into Caiphus Nyoka's room, shoot and kill him, but they were never held accountable, it means that then the judiciary at the time was complicit, because it meant that it didn't hold them accountable. Therefore, almost 40 years after they had committed the crime, only then are they being held accountable, and the judiciary is finally getting to cleanse itself of its complicity, I suppose, to the crime of apartheid.
And it's important for us to paint those pictures of what happened in those various acts all those years ago. I refer again to this article in the Business Day and their interview with Johan Maree. And they quote here Lumka Manjana of the National Prosecuting Authority, who recalled in the Pretoria High Court last November, in the early hours of August 24, 1987, about 2:30 in the morning. There's the picture for you in Davidton. Maree, together with Sergeant Pieter Stander, Sergeant Abraham Hercules Engelbrecht, and other members of the reaction unit, who are also charged separately, arrived in Nyoka's homestead at 999 Alemba Street, Davidton, 2:30 in the morning, and stormed his room. They found him with 3 of his friends sleeping. After identifying him, they removed the friends from the room and thereafter proceeded to shoot him 9 times. He died on the scene. Police claimed in a 1988-89 inquest that Nyoka had a concealed knife. But Maree now admits in that interview that that was indeed a lie. A type of story we've seen play itself out over and over and over. And you speak about the judiciary at the time. There's a great website called unfinishedtrc.co.za, and they've got newspaper clippings connected to all of these stories. And one of them caught my eye from a Weekly Mail, a newspaper, in July of 1989. There's an article that appeared on page 4 of the Weekly Mail. The headline says, "Death in a hail of bullets. Verdict, no one is responsible." And the intro goes, "A magistrate who found police shot dead a Davidton student leader at his home 2 years ago has found no one criminally liable for his death. Magistrate J.P. Myberg, who repeatedly referred to the deceased as the accused, delivered judgment on Wednesday in an inquest into the death of Caiphus Nyoka, who died in a hail of bullets." I am certainly unhappy. I feel shattered, said the family lawyer at the time, Amishant Soman, after the judgment in the Benoni Magistrates Court. Soman said he planned to study the judgment and hope to apply for a review of the findings. There's a lot of questions to be asked of the judiciary of that time.
Yeah, of course, right? Of course, because how do you go into someone's room? Like, so what if he's black? So what? But how do you go into his room and pull a trigger and shoot someone 9 times? Right? And then you walk away and never being held accountable. I can venture to say that these guys will probably then got promoted, because I know that that's what happened in my dad's case. Everybody that had anything to do with the murders of the Cradock Four, shortly after my dad and them were killed, were all promoted. You went from being a brigadier to being a general because you had done the country proud. Now, how is it the law? How does the law allow someone, so what if they're wearing a police officer's uniform, to go inside Caiphus's room, shoot him 9 times, and then for those people never to be held accountable? What were these people taught about who we are? What were they taught? Like, think about it like this. So somebody, who were they told is Caiphus? And what threat was Caiphus to them? All right? For them to walk in there, and it wasn't just these 2 guys that probably burst into his little, little, I don't know if that thing was even 6x6.
Well, let me tell you, Marcelle said in that interview, the day before I shot him, police captured 2 guys with limpet mines and hand grenades. Under interrogation, they confessed they were planning to blow up the Davidton police station and the mayor's house. They were taking the explosives to Nyoka's house. So that evening, the East Rand Security Branch, under Leon Louis van den Berg, allegedly swiftly arranged a preemptive assassination of Nyoka by the Dunatar Reaction Unit number 6.
What evidence was there of all of that? What evidence was there of any of that, right? So they make up this imaginary story, I'm going to argue, that we're going to blow up this police station, right? So does that then give them the right to go and kill him? Like he was absolutely nothing. Like he wasn't someone's brother. Like he wasn't someone's, he wasn't someone's lover at the time, just due to his age.
Or just human.
Or just a human being. You know what I mean? So there's a lot for us to be able to discuss, and this case is crucial. It's crucial in the sense that it allows for us to be able to talk about the atrocities of apartheid that were committed, and the fact that people were never held accountable for having committed those crimes against our humanity. And so it's absolutely vital, and I'm hoping that we will use this again, not as something to drive a further wedge between black people and white people and colored people and Indian people in the country, but as something that we can say, why don't we use this as a stepping block towards building the kind of society for which Caiphus Nyoka ultimately laid down his life for, right? Yes, those people that killed him, they must now be held accountable. But I can, and I know this for a fact, that the Nyoka family would want to build a new country with Engelbrecht and Stander's grandchildren. I know for a fact that Nation does not want her uncle's death to be in vain. Therefore, she would want to build a nation for which her uncle died for.
I want to talk, as we come to the end of our conversation, around the stripping away of the humanity and the humanness of so many of these young people who were in the prime of their life, who, for the use of or the saving of Prince Space, are called anti-apartheid activists, right? Because that's what they're all called. Yeah. And so when we introduced these stories, we would mention that Nyoka was a student leader in Davidton. He was a member of COSAS. He was a member of South African Youth Congress. He was the organizer of the Transvaal Students Congress in the East Rand, president of the SRC at Mabuya High School in Davidton, in Benoni, and on. Those introductions normally go, right? And what I thought is beautiful about this platform, unfinishedtrc.co.za, where this appears, they have these quotes from family members who just describe him as a young man in South Africa at the time. They quote Margaret Nyoka saying, Caiphus was funny. He couldn't bear to see anyone suffer. And he stood against injustice and always had our backs. Melita Nyoka said, he loved dressing up in his matching checkered outfits. He loved going out with friends. He had such a flair for fashion. He was never aggressive or violent, just this warm, sociable soul who made sure he ate and everyone around him ate too. Titos Nyoka. Sport was his thing. He loved soccer and running. Denim jeans were his go-to outfit. He always loved wearing his cap with his popular HR brand from 1984. He used to love playing with his nieces, Margaret and Melita, in 1982 and 83. Joby Kalipa says he was a teacher at heart. And on the story goes. And so there's a moment where this young man says, I want to live my life. And he cares about the young people around him. But if I don't take a stand, who's going to take a stand? But what's lost in the narrative since his murder at the time was, who was he as a person? And what was the South Africa he really wanted to see?
So when we say that apartheid was a crime against humanity, I think that's really the sentiment that we want to convey. That, and I think you've captured it so beautifully. I really think you've captured it so beautifully. Because Caiphus was all of those things, and he was so much more. And he held such potential. And he had a vision of a South Africa that he wanted, not just for himself or for his family, that I think he wanted for every other person or black person in this country. So when they desecrated his body in the way in which they did, to shoot a young 20-something-year-old black guy, defenseless, to shoot him 9 times in his own home, having not committed a single crime. It's like, and we must never lose that. And this is what I say, that in honor of Caiphus, in honor of so many other people that lost their lives, we have the responsibility to try to build the kind of country and the society for which he died for. Otherwise, we are going to be failing him. We are going to be failing him if we allowing the levels of crime to continue in this country. If we're going to fail him if we allow for corruption to go unchecked in this country. We're going to fail his memory and his sacrifice if we don't build a society where the color of our skin doesn't mean anything. Because if we don't do it for him and for so many others, who are we going to do it for?
We heard from Yasmin Suka saying there's a reason why the findings of the Kampempe Commission is going to be so important, so that we really get as many of those unanswered questions answered. How important is it, and where do we stand right now?
Yeah. Well, we need to know. We need to know who it was in the ANC that failed Caiphus Nyoka. Because somebody within the ANC had an agreement with somebody within the old apartheid order that these kinds of atrocities that were committed must never be prosecuted or be brought to light. So we need to know who it was within the ANC. What did Thabo Mbeki do? What did he know? And why, as President of the Republic, why did he not push as hard as he could to ensure that TRC-related cases were dealt with early on in his presidency? What did Bulelani Ngcuka know as the NDPP? What did he do? Bridget Mabandla as the Minister of Justice. What did she know, right? And then we can go down the line. Jacob Zuma, when he took over as President of the Republic, what deals were struck? Because I can assure you that whatever deal that was struck that said that there will be no TRC prosecutions did not have my family's blessing. As Fort's family, we had nothing to do with that. So which then means that whatever deal was made between the ANC and the National Party, right, had nothing to do with us, and we don't have to be bound by that deal. So for us, we continue to pursue justice because whatever deal that was made there had nothing to do with us. And this is why it's crucial that this TRC commission led by Justice Kampempe, that we not only cover it as the media and expose those things, but I think that for the country that we should pay attention, because unless we know what happened there, we run the risk of this thing just being repeated in the next 30 years of our democracy, and we can't afford that.
Justice is needed, and hopefully in our lifetime, justice will be found and delivered. And until then, we'll continue to try and find the truth. Lukhanyo Calata, thank you for your time. eNCA News Director. I'm Marcelle Gordon, and you are listening to this on eNCA.com.